Greetings, Earthlings. Llewdac here from the Daily Alien, your source for all the news you were meant to skip. And today we head north to the sleepy Canadian fishing village of Shag Harbour, Nova Scotia. It was here in October of 1967 that the sky ripped open, something fell out, and then it splashed down harder than a beaver doing a belly flop. Grab your scuba gear for the Shag Harbour incident. No, Bleeblop. Shag Harbour is most certainly not a recreational aquatic spawning ground. It's named after a seabird. I know because I was hauled in front of the Galactic Standards and Practices Tribunal, threatened with an inch of my life for using obscenities in my script. In fact, they insisted I include a picture of the creature in this transmission. Moving on. Our story begins at 12,000 feet near Sherbrooke, Quebec, and it's 7:15 local time when we run across Canadair Cargo Flight 305. However, what the DC-8 Congo variant runs into is something truly bizarre. A giant, brightly glowing rectangle that appears to be a rip in space-time itself. It was at this point that First Officer Robin Ralph noticed the event first and turns to Captain Pierre Charbonnet and says something like, "Hey, Skipper, was that all about?" The trail of glowing orbs emerging from it and flying in formation like they knew what they were doing. And we did. Fearing immediate dismissal on psychological grounds, but being the good and true Canadians they were, they called it in. After reviewing the radar and flight logs, Montreal Area Control reports back they have nothing, either on radar or other reports. Now moving east to the Gulf of Maine and up to 33,000 feet, we encounter Pan Am Flight 160, a Boeing 707 from New York to London at roughly 8:30 p.m. local. Here the pilots were shocked to see glowing red lights separating far beneath their aircraft. Fearing an aircraft casualty or just trying to avoid heavy medication in a straitjacket, the pilots contacted Gander Oceanic ATC and reported concern that they were witnessing an ongoing tragedy. Gander reported back that they had no radar or otherwise traffic in the specified location. And now down to the ground where the fun really begins. And to where, as they would say in Massachusetts, a sleepy drinking village with a fishing problem, Shag Harbour, Nova Scotia. Here we began terracing around at relatively low altitude. Not just over Shag Harbour, but all over southern Nova Scotia, doing what we do best, confusing the apes. This display went on for approximately 2 hours, during which time the befuddled denizens of the region began calling in reports to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, various local authorities, and radio stations. The reports of strange lights became so intense that regional radio hosts became annoyed and bored, having hoped to discuss the pressing issue of irregularities in last night's shipping forecast. And then at roughly 11 o'clock local time, someone decided to screw the pooch. By 11:30 p.m., reports of the crash began flooding in. Laurie Wiggins, 18, and 3 of his friends witnessed the crash from the shore. They flagged down a Royal Canadian Mounted Policeman named Constable Pound and began relaying their story. Now alerted to an actual crash, air traffic control, after confirming the safety of commercial and military aircraft, began combing through flight plans of private aircraft to see if any were missing or reported overdue, but found nothing. And why would they? We don't file flight plans. By midnight, the RCMP, now fully alerted, began searching the shoreline and headed to the docks to seek the aid of local fishermen. Now the Mounties, just love that uniform by the way, head out on the harbor with local fishermen in hopes of finding potential survivors or at least wreckage. However, when they arrived at the crash site, no survivors, no wreckage, only a bizarre yellow film floating on the surface of the water. By daybreak, the Canadian military had joined the search efforts. Canadian Lockheed P-2 Neptune, used for search and rescue and anti-submarine duties, was launched from CFB Greenwood. Soon after, the Canadian Coast Guard cutter 101 arrived in Shag Harbour with divers on board to begin searching the harbour seabed for any wreckage. The Canadian Navy also dispatched 2 Bay-class minesweepers to assist in the search further offshore. However, by the end of the day, the divers of both the Coast Guard and the Navy had found absolutely nothing. The yellow foam had faded, and the search efforts were concluded in confusion and frustration. For what the searchers in Shag Harbour could not know was the reason they didn't find anything at the bottom of the harbour was because the crashed object was no longer there. Either because it was impossible to repair a flying saucer with goose-sized diving waterfowl pelting you every 10 seconds, or Canadian divers searching for you making further detection a virtual certainty, we decided to cheese it up the coast, and some might say out of the frying pan and into the fire. And now our story moves yet again 25 miles up the coast as the crow flies, but more likely 35 miles as a submerged and damaged flying saucer might, to Shelburne, Nova Scotia. And more precisely 7.68 miles south of Shelburne, to the very tip of Sandy Point, where Canadian Forces Base Shelburne was located. You see, to the Canadian public, CFB Shelburne was nothing but an isolated and sleepy technical center. But in actual fact, it was an ultra-secret United States Navy Cold War listening post. The United States Navy referred to the Canadian base as Naval Facility Shelburne, or NAVFAC Shelburne. And NAVFAC Shelburne was a SOSUS station. What is a SOSUS station, you might ask? Well, luckily enough, I'm here to afford you a very brief explanation. SOSUS, which stands for Sound Surveillance System, was a project that began in the 1950s as an early warning detection and location system of passive hydrophone arrays connected by undersea cables to a listening station on shore. To the uninitiated, think of a daisy chain of underwater microphones. Shelburne was not just any SOSUS station, but the primary one, and the first line of defense for detecting Russian ballistic missile submarines as they entered the North Atlantic to fire their nuclear missiles at American targets through the Greenland to UK gap. To say that SOSUS is well beyond top secret would be a dramatic understatement. Therefore, the probability that the United States Navy was unaware of what was going on at Shag Harbour begs credulity even beyond the most rank skeptics' ability to debunk. Now, with the Cold War context taken care of, back to our story where things were about to get unfathomably surreal for the Canadian Navy. In the days that followed our escape from Shag Harbour, Canadian naval attention and the dive teams on board were redirected, by who I wonder, to the waters around Shelburne and Sandy Point. Two Canadian Bay-class minesweepers, the Cowichan and the Granby, were reportedly seen by eyewitnesses prowling the waters near shore as if they were searching for something, and they were. Eventually, they found us, attempting to lay low and effectuate repairs upon our damaged craft in a small inlet off Sandy Point. And that's how the situation remained for a number of days, a sort of intergalactic Mexican standoff. We attempting to repair our craft but not being able to, and the Canadians just sitting on top of us watching as if they were under orders to fix and observe but not to act, as if they were waiting on something. And what that something was is extremely hard to say. Although speculation bordering on rank, there were unsubstantiated reports that a United States Navy Lockheed Super Constellation transport landed at CFB Greenwood during the days following the Shag Harbour incident. This variant of the Super Connie was not regularly seen at the base, but it was one known to be preferred by United States Naval Intelligence for its long range and ability to transport specialty personnel and equipment to remote areas quickly. Whatever the case may be, the standoff continued until Saturday the 8th, when something compelled us to move into deeper water, and the game was again afoot, as the Canadian Navy raced to catch us. When the Canadian Navy caught up to us again, they decided not to take any chances of their quarry escaping this time, and prepared to put divers in the water while they had the chance. As the divers descended towards our craft, they could not have possibly been prepared for what they were about to see. Upon arriving at the scene, they found not one craft, but two. One appeared to be keeping station as if assisting or guarding the damaged craft. The other, which they'd been chasing for days now, had small humanoid figures without respiration gear outside the craft, appearing to effectuate repairs. Some divers, so stunned by what they were witnessing, froze in terror, while others radioed the surface for instructions. The response from the surface was clear and adamant. Do not engage and maintain visual distance. And so they did until their air and decompression limits ran out, undoubtedly taking pictures and technical observations, none of which we'll ever see. The sailors of the Granby and Cowichan were shocked to see the expressions of the divers' faces when they returned to the surface, after clearly enduring the strangest and most stressful experience of their entire lives. Upon their return to the decks of the Granby, the divers were immediately summoned to the bridge and not allowed to speak to anyone until they met with the captain to sign non-disclosure agreements, basically saying speak nothing of what you didn't see underwater or you'll never see daylight again. Now the following morning, well before daybreak, the divers were preparing to make another trip down to check on us. That was until the sonar operator on the Granby exclaimed to the officer of the watch, "They're gone!" And we were. Whether to the depths of the ocean or the depths of space, who can tell? What really happened at Shag Harbour? I'll never tell, but I will say this much. You don't deploy minesweepers, specialized dive teams, and anti-submarine aircraft for yellow foam. With special thanks today to Chris Stiles and Don Ledger, whose excellent reporting in their book, Dark Object, made much of what's known about these events possible. This has been Llewdac from the Daily Alien, reminding you, if it glows, floats, and foams, it's probably not from Earth. Like, comment, and subscribe, and keep your dive gear handy. And we're out. You didn't think the boys up in biological samples could grab me one of those Mountie uniforms, do you? No, you're right. The hat would never fit.